Hello and welcome, or welcome back to my channel. My name is David Novak. This is a recent reads video wherein I talk about the books I have finished reading recently. In the past week, I have wrapped up 4 different books. I've been in the process lately. I've fallen into the habit of reading 4 books at a time. So there is a Library of America at this point, which I close up my evening with a chapter per night, and then I have 3 other things going, and it just sort of happens coincidentally that they all finished really close time-wise. Now, since I have been operating this channel as a booktube channel, I have recorded all of the reading that I've done in recent reads videos. I think only the first one was not under that moniker. And I have made a playlist. So if you want to go into the past and hear what thoughts I had about the various things that I read, you can find that playlist. Not to say that I review the books, I don't do that. I, at best, give some superficial thoughts about my feelings, my reactions to the books. I've already talked about this one. This is the first part in the Library of America set of Henry Adams's History of the United States, which covers the presidency of Thomas Jefferson. He covers the main public brouhahas of the day, and you get a good day-to-day glimpse into the workings of the administration, into the political machinations on both sides of the aisle, so to speak. And it's very interesting. The history of Jefferson's administration was never high on my priority list, but so far I have found the reading of it to be worthwhile. I very much enjoyed hearing about Aaron Burr. The volume closes out with the fiasco, I think you could say, of Jefferson's embargo. And it's an interesting note to the end of his presidency. Nobody throughout the most of it could have been as popular as Jefferson was. And by the end, the last 6 months or so, everything has fallen apart for Jefferson politically, for a politician who wanted nothing so much as to be loved. He was pretty roundly despised from within his party and from the other party. And so he leaves office rather ignominiously. I grew to like Jefferson a little bit at the end because one is always a bit sympathetic to somebody whose failings are so manifest. I do have to concede, though, I think I've read 4 chapters of the second volume, which starts with the presidency of Madison. I confess that I'm a bit happy that Jefferson is out of the picture at this point. It's not that I think James Madison is going to be Mr. Personality. Indeed, if anything, so far, he is the opposite of that. And a further detraction to the volume on Madison is that his writing is not nearly so good as Jefferson's. And so when Adams quotes excerpts, they are much harder to follow. That said, the writing by Adams is very good. And so the book itself is worthwhile. And I learned a lot about the United States and Jefferson under his presidency, and I expect that trend to continue with Madison. I think in January, when I was reading War and Peace by Tolstoy, that was the first sort of historical inquiry I've ever had into Napoleon. Of course, Napoleon figures prominently in all of this, pretty much. And I have never really studied the causes of the War of 1812, which will be coming up soon in the sequel to this, that is in Volume 2. So that was the first book that I finished. And next I finished The Olympic Games by Finley and Pleket. This was a part of Summer of Sports, which is a booktube event wherein one is encouraged to read a book of sports writing of some sort. And so this gave me the perfect excuse or opportunity to read one of the few remaining books by Moses Finley, which I have not read. So I read it. It reads just as well as any of his books. I believe that the polishing up of the final text must have been in his hands. I don't know much about Pleket outside of that. And it's not a topic that has ever been any pressing interest to me, or of any pressing interest. This book has been on my shelf for a long time. But I'm glad I read it. I never really understood the place that not just the Olympic Games, but all of the games held or occupied within Greek culture and then later within Roman culture. And I think these authors did a very good job of covering it. It segues into a bit of philosophy as to the reasons that the Greeks were so enamored of competitive athletics, then segues into the criticisms of sports as such, and then also asks questions without any real answers as to why none of those criticisms made a difference. Didn't mean a thing. So I am very glad to have read this. Justin at Triumphal Reads recently has a video, and I will link it, wherein he talks about more recent scholarship on the Olympics. Particularly, he points out a couple of books, and I would bet that if you are interested in studying this, while you can't go wrong with this book, you might want something more current than that. Let me just see when this was. Well, copyright 1976. So it's not as old as something else could be, but it's probably just the starting place for contemporary scholarship on the games. Then I read and finished the Sicilian Vespers. I did not expect to finish this book anywhere near within the same time frame as any of the others. For the others, I was mostly hitting one chapter per day, if that. And this book, I almost inevitably would read 2 chapters per day. I enjoyed the story. I am a novice to the medieval world and scholarship of the Middle Ages. So especially at the beginning, there was an awful lot that I could not catch up on. I don't have a good sense of the geography or of the various houses that were the huge power players of the day, and then all of the intricate relationships between them. But that said, as the story progressed, you follow very much, King Charles of Sicily, who is also known as Charles of Anjou, and his story is captivating. During his life, during his time as a supreme power broker in Europe, there is a huge succession of popes, and so Runciman does a very good job of first introducing you to all of the cast of characters, and then when the action starts happening and there are deaths, you are pretty much up to speed with all of the main characters, and so there's not a lot of backtracking necessary to remind you who this one or that one is. And the only other book of medieval history that I can recall, well, I came to this just after finishing his book on the fall of Constantinople, and last year I read Runciman's 3-volume trilogy on the Crusades. The Crusades was my first look into the times and into the region, and I enjoyed the Crusades, but what I missed was any real understanding of what was going on in Europe at the same time. So this talked about that, and of course the Crusades are mentioned here and there. In this, I also, just before this, and I think before the Runciman read, no, it was just before this immediately, the book by Maurice Keene, the Pelican History of Medieval Europe, I think it was, and I think that book permutated into various titles depending on whether Pelican books existed or it was Penguin and so forth. But that also introduced me to a lot, and so I can see Maurice Keene really attributed to the 100 Years' War between England and Britain, the formation of nation states, I guess you would say, or the location of power, political power, moving into nations as we know them today. Runciman suggests that the process of that change begins earlier. So I said that I wanted to read Runciman again next, and I will talk about that in a moment. The last of the 4 books which I finished reading was the memoirs of Olaudah, except he's never called that in the book. It's what is it? If I can see it in here. Gustavus Vasa. Obviously that was not the name he was born with, and I never really got a clear sense of if Olaudah Equiano was a name he was born with. I kind of don't think so. And the book was very engaging. This was the first first-person slave narrative that really made a big splash. It antedates the other major ones that you may have read, such as Frederick Douglass's or Harriet Jacobs. But while it sort of set the template for those narratives to come, it's very different. For one thing, it begins, he tells his story from his extraction, from his kidnapping in Africa, and then every successive step. And then the trajectory of his career in slavery, so to speak, is very distinct from anybody else's in the other major arcana of slavery writings, in that he tended to find himself in more privileged positions of servitude than others, and he was able to purchase his way out of slavery. His owner at the time was not a cruel taskmaster who treated him horribly, as I think was pretty much closer to the norm. So he allowed Equiano to have possessions and money and invest and make profit and carry his own personal goods for trade on the ship and make profit and so forth. So he, as a slave, he was generally a sailor on a ship or a helper to the captain or whomever. And after he gets his freedom, the story becomes even more interesting in the glimpse it gives of what life was like for the free black man, particularly in places like the Caribbean. But also in the United States, he did take some trips to, I think, Savannah and what's the other one? I'm saying South Carolina, but that's not the one I mean. I think possibly Charleston, but I could be wrong on that. And just the constant treachery that a man or woman with black skin was subject to in the colonial world, in the days of colonialism, I should say, in the days of full-fledged, rampant slavery. So that was particularly interesting. And then he discovers Christianity and becomes a diehard believer. And at that point, the narrative runs a little bit out of steam. I don't think the book offers this edition a timeline of his life. And so he makes mention that, say, the first half of the story is a little bit more interesting than the second, or the first half of his life is a little bit more interesting than the second half. And so I think that's true. The book, the major part of the book covers those earlier years, the earlier half or whatever it is. And the very later part comes down to some of his anti-slavery activities, his debacles in trying to work for the British government. And so it's filled with a lot of protest against his character having been maligned, and then with letters of testament as to his good character and so forth. And so the last couple of chapters made for tedious reading. So just to talk briefly about where I am heading next, keeping the nautical theme, I have begun Joshua Slocum's Sailing Alone Around the World, which I'm sure I heard about first on Steve Donahue's channel a long time ago, who has a Boston connection in common with Slocum, and I believe has been known to spend time on the waters, not on a surfboard, but on some kind of sloop, I would imagine. I don't know any more than that. So I talked about Runciman, and I have not really begun any Runciman yet. And I have a whole bunch, well, 4 books by Runciman that I purchased. And then just to complement those and to satisfy my curiosity, I checked out 3 books by Runciman from the library. And I may well go and read The White Rajas next. It's something of an anomaly. I would have expected myself to be reading about Byzantium some more, which was his major focus. But this is a history of Sarawak from 1841 to 1946, and I did not know, but Sarawak is a part of the island of Borneo. And so this is just a northern part, just something totally out of the blue, but I know absolutely nothing about that. I've read very little on Borneo, and the Europeans there, I only know very minimally through things I've looked at pertaining to after the war. So this book closes in 1946, begins in 1841. So it's a very different thing to Runciman's usual, I think you could say. But because I happen to have it on hand and because it's something I know just about nothing about, I think it's probably a good time for me to undertake it. I think you can buy this book for something like $30, and there's a couple of other books by Runciman floating around in that price range, which I am very interested in seeing, which of course you can't get by the Chicago Public Library. Possibly some sort of interloan library would happen, but I don't think that usually works in Chicago. Probably people have loaned books to Chicago and don't get them back. That would be my guess, but I really don't know. I'm slandering my local public library based on no real information, just a lot of years of experience. And then I decided that it was time possibly to pick up Euclid, and I think figured out a MO for this, my modus operandi, so to speak, which will be to actually read the things that Euclid has written. There's copious notes, there's I think some biographical information of Euclid insofar as anything is known, I'm not sure, and talking about his position within the mathematics of the time. I don't believe he was an original inventor of anything. He was just sort of the guy who got everything together. And it all looks very interesting, everything by Sir Thomas Heath. But I've decided to stick as close as I can to Euclid himself. I'm trying to see, okay, the font of Euclid himself is bigger than all of the supporting material. And I'm going to stick with Euclid and then, as necessary, dip into the notes, but more than that, as necessary, try to find supplemental information on YouTube, which I have found some things. It's kind of hard sometimes to narrow it down, and I am intending to take this very, very slowly. So I've only gotten as far as the first proposition in the book. It's divided into what is it? Definitions, definitions, postulates, and then common notions, and then the propositions. And so I'm just going to take it slow and try to spend time in the world of mathematics with Euclid. And I don't know to what extent I'm going to try to understand everything. I would ideally like to, but I can't say. So that is where I have been for the last week or so and where I hope to be heading. I will check in again when I have had a few more books that I finish. But since I am at the start on all of these at the moment, the next recent reads video will not come soon. I suppose I should just make a mention. The BookTube world has been shocked yet again by another death in our community. Alice and the Giant Bookshelf. I was not a follower of her channel. I watched it, I think, maybe twice. But I am very aware of how close-knit this community is, and I am watching the tributes come around, and I am thinking that I may do the Hercule Poirot tag, although I'm not sure to what extent I can, because I am not a big reader of mysteries, and her channel was somewhat devoted to mystery novels, and the tag that's going around is a tag, I believe, which she created, but I will be thinking about that. I am still reeling from the death of Jennifer Brooks, which is still less than 6 months ago. She died at the beginning of this year, and today I think is June 28th. So not even half a year has passed, and we've seen 3 deaths. Of course, Scott of the Bookish Bryants passed just 2 weeks ago, something like that. And Steve Donahue spoke pretty eloquently on his channel, talking about the genuineness of the relationships in a community like this, and I think he is absolutely right. Actually, with the advent of social media, Facebook and so forth, having to cope with the deaths of people that I have grown to know and even to love has been a very difficult facet. That's part of the experience of being a human, obviously, and somebody in my sort of position, of course, inevitably asks the question, why not me? You know, none of these booktubers, and of course, when I started my channel, the community was reeling after the death of Pax Panic. Actually, I think she had not succumbed when I started my first couple of videos, but I had not followed her channel either. And all of these individuals are just young. I just went again to Jennifer's channel, and her penultimate video was 24 books for 2024. And as Steve Donahue was saying about Alice, now it will not happen. That is the slings and arrows that we live under as being mortal beings, suffering this mortal coil, so to speak. But I felt that I should not let this video go without making mention. Thank you very much for stopping by my channel.